TGV is yes, quite clearly the TGV is not a popular subject with your members, but for the 12 of you who've kindly joined in, we're going to look at 40 years of high-speed rail in France. It's particularly pertinent because as construction is underway in this country for the most expensive per mile vanity high-speed railway project in the world, you might at the end consider that the entire 2,600 kilometer high-speed rail network of France has been built for the same cost as HS2. So the first half, we're going to look at the development of the TGV train itself and the initial lines of the French high-speed system. In the second half, we'll look at other variations of the TGV, particularly the introduction of the double-deckers, the further lines to be built, and the future, and perhaps a reflection on how successful the TGV has been. So the project was a project which was going to link the principal cities of France with Paris, and for regional services with other parts of the country. The cities in front of you illustrated there, which are Lille, Strasbourg, Nice, Marseille, Lyon, Nantes, Bordeaux, and Rennes are the major cities of France, and the dates that you see underneath the pictures are when they were initially connected by high-speed services, and in brackets where the high-speed line linked directly into the city centre. It all began some 50 years ago in the 1960s, 60 years ago really, when the former Paris-Lyon Méditerranée railway, which was the southeast division of SNCF, was faced with a problem of capacity and line speed. The area shaded here shows you that part of France, which represents a third of the French population and some of the major cities, particularly those of Lyon and Marseille, the two biggest cities in France after Paris. The project would be to improve line speeds. Still in the 1960s, there were steam services operating over the main line, particularly obviously running on regional services coming onto the line and then branching off onto non-electrified sections, which these trains were unable to travel at the same speeds of the more modern generation electric locomotives. So this was one of the issues. The modern electric locomotives could do 100 miles an hour, whereas most steam services were operating at 60 to 70 miles an hour. 60 to 75. So the original line, which is the sort of main line, you could equate it in a way with the LMS, the sort of connecting connecting the city of Paris, the capital, with Lyon and Marseille. So that followed the river valleys of the River Seine and the River Rhône on the red route shown here, a route of 512 kilometers down to Lyon. There were two particular parts of this line which were restrictive in terms of operation, where the quadruple track of the former PLM line was reduced to 2 tracks, and that was they are the two areas shown here, which totaled 109 kilometers in total. The section marked as 26 kilometers also included the Blazy Bar Tunnel, so this was a constricting factor. The French had a lot of experience with high-speed trains. The Thomas Crampton Greyhound in 1852 was doing 72 miles an hour in the 1870s. The Bugatti rail car, 120 nearly miles an hour. The, of course, world record electric locos of 1955. And they also flirted with the idea of having an aerotrain system operating on a monorail, which could operate at speeds of up to 250 miles an hour. So in 1972, they were experimenting, as we were here in the UK, with a high-speed gas turbine train. This actually was very successful. It achieved a world speed record for gas turbine traction, and it would have gone ahead in that form in the same way as ours would if it had not been for the fact that there was rising oil and gas prices. The Arab-Israeli war and other conflicts in the Middle East created uncertainty. And so it was decided not to stick with this form of traction. So to go back to the original problem faced with the capacity and speed problem, there were two ways of overcoming this. They would upgrade the existing route, the sort of like we did with the West Coast Main Line, the upgrade, or they would build a new dedicated high-speed railway line to deal with the extra capacity needed. And this would have connections. It would not be isolated, but this would have connections to the classic railway network. The dedicated high-speed railway line was going to be the answer, because for a start, it only cost 40% of a projected upgrade. This would mean that they could use the new technology initially thought of as the gas turbine, but obviously electric power would be used. They would have a train, the TGV train, which would be able to operate on both the classic lines and on the high-speed line with the signaling systems that suited both. And it would operate under 1500 volts DC, which of course the existing network was electrified at, or 25,000 volts for the new line. 25,000 volts is of course much more efficient for the reasons we'll come to in a moment. The new trains, which would ultimately start service in 1981, would be able to climb steep gradients. And as I mentioned before, they would be able to operate on and off of classic routes. The one thing they learned from the trials of the 1955 high-speed tests were that a Bobo locomotive was much less destructive than a COCO. So the new electric locos, this is what the COCO locomotive did, where what's known as hunting occurred, where there's oscillation of the bogies. So the new electric locomotive was going to be developed using a Bobo system. Believe it or not, this is what SNCF used as a sort of test bed for their motors, for their bogies, and for their catenary. I mean, this looks just about as dilapidated as they come, and that's basically because it is. But they managed to turn it into this with a fairing on the front, and you can see here a different style of bogies and the Faverley pantograph installed. So the locomotive at the top of the three illustrated is that of the gas turbine power car. The same principles would be used, except obviously it would be an electric traction. Initially, they thought that this would be articulated with the coaches as the gas turbine was, but the sensible solution prevailed, whereby they used a separate locomotive which could be detached from its coaching sets. The first actual, the prototype electric TGV was outshopped in 1976, and this would spend a few years in tests and trials before the production went into full swing. What would be different about this would be the technology that was acquired from those high-speed tests, whereby one of the locomotives had the axle-mounted motors. And this would give a better system of transmission, especially suited to the 25 kVA. The two power cars would enclose an articulated 8-car coaching set. And as you can see there, that the completed train gave 6.45 megawatts with a power to weight ratio of just over 22 horsepower per ton. This illustrates the axle mounted, the bogie mounted motors. And this was a system of traction that they would stick with through all the various generations of the TGV. There would be two pantographs. There would be a pantograph of 1500 volts and a 25,000 volt pantograph. In keeping with most tradition of electric traction in France, where the TGV leaves a station under 1500 volts, that's either Paris, in Paris, that is in Paris, Gare de Lyon or Montparnasse. The two 1500 volt pantographs would be raised, and then once on the move, they would be lowered at a speed of about 70 miles an hour, and the 25,000 volt pantograph at the rear of the set would be raised. So here you are, there's the two pantographs, the 1500s, this is the Gare de Lyon, and the train is obviously ready to leave. This would enable it to get maximum power to the two power cars. The initial TGVs would be left-hand drive, as you see here, and this is one of the Atlantique sets, although the interior of the early so-called PSE sets was the same. The rolling axle loading would have to be 17 tons for the design of the track and everything, and so the articulation between the coaches would suit this very well, because obviously they could get the maximum amount allowable by the coaches sharing a common bogie. Inside, it's pretty much airline seating. This is one of the early PSE. PSE stands for Paris Sud-Est, the line going out from the Gare de Lyon, and this is the first class coach showing you the airline seating with just one table for 4 and one table for 2 in the middle. Various coaching formations have been created over the various years. The TGV PSEs, well, in fact, all of the TGVs, including Eurostar, which is actually just a TGV with a different sort of body shell, all of them would be made by the enormous company of Alstom. The power cars will be built at their Belfort works to the east of France on the Swiss border, and the coaching sets will be built at La Rochelle, at Étré, a suburb of La Rochelle. And as you can see here, at the time it was done to buy everything you could buy it nationally within France, and all of these famous manufacturers supplied various components. De Dietrich supplied the two exterior coaches, if you like, the number 1 and number 8. They were a special creation. Favorly, the pantographs, the electric motors by Germont Schneider, Westinghouse brakes, and so on. All these components came from factories and companies within France. And this is a picture here. This is a later picture, obviously, with one of the later power cars being built here at the Belfort works. Belfort is just near the border of Switzerland. So the first line opened on the 27th of September 1981. And for reasons of construction, to minimize the impact of construction, the first stage was built from the middle of Burgundy down to Lyon, and that was opened in 1981. And the second stage, dotted blue on the map here, would be opened in 1983, and this was opened 2 years later, not for budgetary reasons as we did with our HS1, but for the fact that the second stage would also be built alongside a motorway, and if they could build the motorway and the railway at the same time, this would minimize the impact of construction traffic. So that opened, as I mentioned, on the 27th of September 1981. Initially, the trains would trundle along the old classic route down to Saint-Florentin, and then take the high-speed route for the second half of the journey, and that would be a journey completed in 2 hours and 40 minutes. This gives you an idea of the track being laid here, and this is the scene on that second section, and exactly the same scene here a couple of years later when the motorway is built as well. If you've been on this line, you'll know that the A5 is running alongside, because this is the motorway when there's a rare event of actually seeing a car traveling along it. The line was going to be much easier to build because they didn't have to follow river valleys or avoid steep hills. The existing peak of the old PLM route was something like 390 meters above sea level, passing through the Blazy-Var Tunnel. Well, the red dotted line shows you that level there, and the fact that the TGV's new line would actually go much higher, up to 500 meters, and it would be able to go uphill and down dale at a ruling gradient of 1 in 28. So it was not constrained by geography or physical barriers such as mountains and small mountains and such like. The cost of this, the cost of the first high-speed line would make you weep because it is just so ridiculously cheap. The French state bought 409 kilometers of distance in the form of 2,400 hectares of land. And the track works took a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, and then of course commissioning and the electric systems were tested up until 1980. High-speed railway lines take a fraction of the space that a motorway does. You can see here 13.6 meters is the minimum width. And you can see here the sort of construction of the substructure, 350 millimeters of ballast. And the B block sleepers, they are the 2 concrete blocks with a metal bar connecting the two, with 60 kilo per meter weight of rail, and of course it's all continuous welded. The line was built to a much less demanding construction than some of the later TGVs. The specification for the curves, for instance, was only 3.2 kilometer radius. That was the minimum. And so it was very easy to avoid sort of unnecessary crossings of rivers and things. And the picture here is taken with a telephoto lens, but it's not far off the fact that these trains could follow quite a sinuous path down to Lyon. 1 in 28, the maximum maximum gradient in terms of steepness, and 260 to 270 kilometers an hour would be the signaling system employed. I mentioned that 25,000 volts is much more efficient in terms of power supply to electric motors. Well, apart from the performance side of it, the infrastructure side is much simpler too. You only need 1 substation every 50 miles. Sorry, every 50 kilometers. So you have fewer of these. The actual catenary system is a much lighter weight construction. And of course, it's fed direct from the national grid, which since the 1970s has primarily been supplied by nuclear power in France. The track to cab signaling, transmission voie machine, is a system which, of course, we use here on HS1 and we will do on HS2. Works out with the original type of TVM 300, with 4 blocks of 2.1 kilometers, providing a headway of 5 minutes. At full speed, it probably takes a TGV about 2 and a bit blocks of this to actually come to a dead stand. Later system, the TVM 430, which all of the French system is now fitted with, and HS1 in England, it gives you more flexibility because they have smaller blocks with a headway of 3 minutes. The displays at the bottom are what the driver would see, and of course, if he does fall asleep, then ultimately it would the automatic braking control would set in. To operate the TGV, there weren't going to be any of this nonsense that we're having at Euston at the moment, where we're going to have a new station built. Is it going to be under the old one, next to the existing one? the TGV was going to be brought right into the Gare de Lyon. And this, of course, was already a pretty busy station. So to provide room, they built, as part of what would become the RER system of Paris, effectively that's Crossrail and Thameslink sort of put into one. They would create 2 underground stations alongside the Gare de Lyon and the Rue de Bercy, which would house the future RER trains on the bottom level, the RER A, which goes east-west, and the RER D on the top level with 4 platforms, which will go north-south. And until those lines were connected through to the Gare du Nord and beyond, this was used as a temporary suburban terminus station. Once completed, it was all filled in and you wouldn't know it's there. And the TGV therefore had some more platform space in the actual Gare de Lyon itself. This is the RER D line, the RER D platforms, the 2 island platforms. And as I say, these served as a terminus until 1988, when the through line to Châtelet and onto Gare du Nord was created. And the TGV could therefore operate from the main station. Rather than just throw people in and train crews in at the deep end, a crew training and passenger familiarization plan was put in for a year, whereby the TGV or some TGVs would operate on two classic timetables on classic lines, so that the crews could get used to operating the train and the passengers could get used to the 1 door per coach. So it started off then on the 27th of September, and the SNCF promotional picture below shows you a group of TGVs waiting to get going. 111 of these were built, the first generation TGVs, and 10 of them were fitted with triple voltage capacities, so that they could also be operated into Switzerland on through services from Paris and Dijon. A computerized ticket system was instituted. And of course, as you know, if you've been to France traveling, then you must compost your ticket. Otherwise, you're sent to the guillotine immediately. The tickets, of course, are not valid on any other train, but it's just one of those things that the French are very, very fussy about, is composting your ticket. The TGVs, all of the TGV lines out of Paris have to use conventional tracks for some distance before the high-speed line proper itself starts. This is a picture here to the south of Paris, where the TGV above is coming in on a flyover over the old classic route, which this is a train of the RER heading towards Paris, and the two will travel in side by side on the way into the terminus under 1500 volt DC. There were no particular engineering challenges for the first line. Effectively, they just went over the hills and crossed rivers on fairly modest viaducts. And of course, it was all open countryside. There was no objection from protesters or anything like that. And the line all went to schedule very well indeed. Initially, to curry favor with local politicians, they were very keen to build out-of-town stations. I'm not sure that we have I don't think there are any out-of-town stations on HS1 first section, but certainly here at Mâcon and Le Creusot, these two stations were effectively white elephants for years, until eventually people started using them. As I say, it assuaged the concerns of local politicians and put their town on the map, but that was about all. Once the TGV fleet was beginning to be delivered, it was in squadron service. In the winter, they had capacity at weekends, and so they introduced TGV Neige, which means the snow TGV, and they operated them to places like Albertville, Modane. Bourg Saint-Maurice, and these still operate to this day from either the Gare du Nord or the Gare de Lyon, and they are very successful indeed. They travel either last thing at night or first thing in the morning, occasionally an overnight one, but only on the longest journeys. The TGV had reached Lyon, and of course its ultimate objective was to get to Marseille, the main city on the Mediterranean. So to speed the TGVs on their way, they upgraded a part of the line of the Rhone Valley to 200 kilometers an hour, so that this could shave a few more minutes off of the schedule on its way south. Having done this in 1983, it would still be another 18 years before the TGV lines actually reached Marseille. Another time where there was spare capacity was during the middle of the day, or perhaps overnight. The La Poste, the national post carrier of France, the Royal Mail of France, if you like, had been using these Transall cargo planes carrying 14.3 kilos of 14.3 tons, I beg your pardon, of pallet of mail from Le Bourget airport down to Lyon. Well, somebody came up with a clever idea that a TGV train could be, all the chairs could be, all the seats could be removed, sliding doors fitted. It could handle 88 tons of palletized mail. And this was put into service and was a very, very successful venture indeed, until, of course, the use of snail mail started to decline. Special stations were built that could handle these palletized containers at Paris Charolais next to the Gare de Lyon, Mâcon, Lyon, and Cavaillon. And of course, this meant that the mail from city centre to city centre was even quicker than by plane. This is the well-known SNCF location of Singlewell. I'm sure Henry would have stuck his nose over the fence here from time to time, near to Gravesend. And this was back, I think, in 2012, when a TGV La Poste unit came over for a press event at St Pancras for the new parcel service from Charles de Gaulle Airport to Barking Ripple Lane. Needless to say, it never got off the ground, and the TGV post units were scrapped in 2016. Nice was reached in 1986, and the journey time was reduced by about 2 hours 40 minutes down to 7 hours 40. Today it's about 5 hours. And this is a picture of the TGV coming away just near to Nice Airport here on its way back to Paris. Now, because no agreement could be made with the British government about the funding of the Channel Tunnel, the SNCF decided to continue with their high-speed rail building by building the next route, which is the Atlantique. The Atlantique was going to open in 2 stages, and this was going to be, again, a long-term project to reach the cities of Rennes and Bordeaux. But this would be even longer in the making. It would be another 17 or 18 years before either those cities were reached directly by high-speed lines. The second section down to Tours opened in 1990. Now, since the first TGVs had been introduced, the development of electric motors had progressed, and a new generation train known as the Atlantique was developed, and this could use much more powerful motors. This would be powered with 8 1.1 megawatt motors, as opposed to the previous 12 675 kilovolt motors. And this would give a much greater power to weight ratio. And it would also enable the trains to be 10 coaches long, 10 passenger coaches long. There you see the comparison between the two. The 8 motors could be accommodated in the power cars only. The original PSE sets had to have the additional bogie at each end of the coaching set motorized as well. And as the original Eurostars were. And so you can see here that the new generation of TGV was giving 26.56 horsepower per ton, considerably more than its earlier sister. The station the station where the trains would operate from would not be the traditional route down to the south of France, which would be from Paris-Austerlitz, but here from Paris-Montparnasse. You've all seen this picture before of the 240 crashing through because the driver didn't put the brakes on. But the station was rebuilt in the 1960s, and rather a dismal place it is too. The station was rebuilt initially just the block behind, but when the TGV arrived, they tried to give it a little bit of the SNCF tradition of this sort of curved structure depicting the overall roof of most SNCF stations. Inside, it's a pretty dismal affair with a concrete beam construction with offices and stuff over the top of the station. And the one thing I'm sure many of you haven't realized is that before every TGV departs, the driver gets out and has a pee in front of the train here. As you can see, he's actually peeing on the track because it's about half a mile to walk back to the toilets. But I don't think he realized I was there at the time. But having exchanged words with him after he had adjusted his dress, I then was invited to travel in the cab for 1 hour further down the line, which of course I did not object to at all. Now, whereas the TGV Southeast route, the PSE route, was passing out of the southeast of Paris, the southwest of Paris is a different kettle of fish. It's much posher. And so a lot of nice residences, Versailles down that way, the town of Sceaux with its chateau and everything. And this needed environmental protection. Initially, the first couple of miles, they have these so-called acoustic barriers or screens. And all these really do is they just reflect the noise from the barrier over to the poor side of town, and so that the local residents are not inconvened by the noise of the TGVs. And I have to say that when the TGVs are starting off, they are quite noisy. The Chateau of Sceaux, S-E-A-U-X, is about 10 miles out from Montparnasse. And here, the TGV would pass under the André Le Nôtre Gardens at the back in a tunnel. Other parts of the route, if you've traveled out, you think you're in a tunnel, but in fact, a lot of it is actually a concrete tunnel section placed on top of on top of ground, and then it's covered over to give it the impression of a sort of surface-mounted tunnel. And this is because of the close proximity of residential buildings and other establishments. And this gives you an impression here of where it's passing by quite a densely populated area. So the station here, I'm not sure if my cursor shows up on your screen, but up there, Paris-Montparnasse at the top center of the screen, the TGVs only use classic route for about a mile coming out of Montparnasse, and then they go onto an old disused railway formation into the tunnel of Sceaux, and then they start to gain speed thereafter. Initially 1500 volt DC, and in that tunnel, the pantographs, one will be lowered and the other one raised. There's a sign on the side which says baissez pantos. It doesn't mean drop your pants, but it actually means that the lowering of the 1500 volt pantograph is undertaken and the 25 kVA is put up. And then from there, on this route at that time, 1989, the TGVs would travel for another 45, 50 minutes at maximum speed. An out-of-town station, which is utter nonsense, is the Gare de Massy-Palaiseau. This is about 20 miles from the center of Paris, perhaps not even that. The one thing you don't do is have well, you've got one at Ebbsfleet, and much to my disgust, it's been closed and will be closed for another year and a half or something. You don't put the brakes on a high-speed train the second you started. The only difference being at Ebbsfleet, at least you could guarantee some passengers would get on. But here, this station was a nonsense, and they've stopped actually Paris bound and Paris destination TGV stopping here now, and it's only used for cross-country services. So once the TGV is clear of the Greater Paris area, it's out in the open wheat fields of France. You can see here in the center region, the granary in the background there. The TGVs are traveling at about 170 miles an hour. And you can see the massive length of two of these TGV sets. They're 1,558 feet long, and that's 20 coaches and 4 power cars. Woe betide you if you come back to Paris and you're in coach 20 and the buffer stops are at coach 1. At a number of stations, but here at Rennes, these massive trains are so long that you can't ask the driver to get out and uncouple the two units because they're going to split here, and it would be beneath the dignity of the train manager to do it. So they actually have a shunter on the station who disconnects the two units, the Scharfenberg couplers, and he operates this panel on the side of the TGV to release them, and another driver will have appeared into the rear unit. On that Atlantic route, it splits. One goes via Le Mans and Rennes to Brest, one of the main naval bases of France. And this is en route to Brest, where the TGV Atlantique crossing over the 125 feet high Morlaix Viaduct, a viaduct which once had meter gauge and standard gauge trains crossing on the top and a meter gauge tramway in the street. And then they get to Brest here, a very important destination on the TGV network, to the rather attractive Art Deco station here, a station which survived the bombardments of World War II. Everything else in Brest was flattened, but somehow the station avoided that. This is Poitiers. We're now on the other link of the TGV going down towards Bordeaux, and this is where I got my cab ride. Once I got into the cab, the chap who invited me, who was having the pee, is just getting back in. I hasten to add, I didn't shake hands with him. He's getting back in, and it turned out he wasn't even the driver. He was actually a retired driver who was just bunking a free trip up to Paris for the day. The driver who you saw in that picture of the control panel at the beginning, a very amiable chap, and gave me his card to say if ever I came over again and wanted another ride, to give him a call. Traveling in the cab here, we're traveling down between Poitiers and Angoulême. I said to the driver, wouldn't it be a good idea if the windscreen wiper was on as it was raining? He said, oh, the wipers don't work on this unit. We have nonsense in this country. I mean, the nonsense of this country, things with HS1 is that even when the Channel Tunnel was opened, we hadn't really formulated the final or finalized the final route to the Channel Tunnel, and we did everything, you know, had to fit around what was there, particularly at Dollens-Moor. French politicians are not free of blame either. Here at Futuroscope, they thought this would be a wonderful idea to have an out-of-town station for people coming. It's a sort of a cinematic Disney World, coming here to Futuroscope. But hardly any TGVs stop here, and the new high-speed line doesn't have any connection with it. So this again is one of those white elephants designed by administrators. As you come into Bordeaux, for about 20 years, I suppose, the TGVs cross the old steel bridge from linking the two banks across the river Garonne. It was the first project that Gustave Eiffel ever worked on. He was the foreman here. And of course, his company went on to build the overall roof over Bordeaux station. This was replaced by the sons of Eiffel, or the great-great-grandsons, if you like, the company of Eiffage, who are one of the biggest steel fabricating companies in the world. And this now has quadruple tracks over the river, and the old bridge is preserved as a monument historique. This was the old approach into Bordeaux Saint-Jean station. You can see it's quite a sinuous approach, but now there's a more direct route in. And when you come into the station, it is said to be, if not the largest, one of the largest overall roofs in terms of clear span and length in Europe, built by the Eiffel Company back in the 1890s. Even in 2006, the most technologically advanced train in France, the TGV Atlantique, was passing under semaphore signals here in the southwest of France. Just an absolute, a complete nonsense, really, when you think that 1 minute they're traveling at 200 miles an hour and the next they're passing signals which were designed for the earliest of steam locomotives. The network of the Atlantique is like this. You can see this is the network is shown in 2002, and this wouldn't change until 2018. But the trains come off of high speed, and then they follow all of these dotted blue lines. One of the benefits of high-speed lines in France is that they have also brought about additional electrification to existing routes. So the lines shown in red to Saint-Malo, to Lannion, to Les Sables d'Olonne and La Rochelle have all been electrified so that the TGV can continue to those destinations. Engineering works a little bit more than this southeastern branch. The tunnels, 2 tunnels highlighted here. The first tunnel up near Massy is about 4 kilometers long, but of course, much more importantly, is the tunnel at Vouvray near to Tours. This is not because there are any mountains or anything, but this was to avoid the sacred vineyards of the Loire. And of course, this is much more important than any disturbing any noise for residents, because the grapes might get disturbed by the whooshing of TGVs. So the high-speed line to the north came about. It was opened, as you know, in 1993, and the Channel Tunnel in 1994. The obvious line from Paris to the Channel Tunnel was, as shown here, via Amiens through Picardy and straight to Calais. But this didn't make sufficient of a business case. And so it was decided that the line would be built from Paris to Brussels, with a branch line, if I could use that expression, from Lille to the Channel Tunnel. And that was the formation that it took. And if you've been on Eurostar, you will know that when you go through Lille and join the high-speed line to Paris, that you actually pass under the main line, which has the sort of through tracks, if you like, towards Brussels. The line would be, of course, used by Eurostar, and because of the fire requirements of the Channel Tunnel, that would mean a new concept of TGV. This is, of course, those early days from 1994 to 2003, well, to 2007, actually. The so-called high-speed trains would trundle out of Waterloo. They would come up onto the line from Victoria through Penge. This is Bickley, just near to Bromley in Kent, under 750 volts. And then once through into the Channel Tunnel, they would pick up the overhead electrification system. From 2003 in part and 2007 in full, they would operate with overhead electric supply. And of course, this is how they would be operating. This is what I mentioned earlier about the afterthought of High Speed 1, whereby they had to literally wedge it in on the edges of Dollond's Moor. This is the up line to St Pancras, and the down line is way on the other side of Dollond's Moor. For reasons of fire protection, which of course have been eliminated with the so-called the new generation Eurostars, the Velaros, the fire authorities insisted that the TGV Eurostar had to be divisible in the middle. The lower picture shows the junction of 2 9-car units, and should there have been a fire, the idea was that the train manager would shepherd everybody out of one portion of the train into the other. The one on fire, or where the fire was in the tunnel, would be abandoned, and the train manager would then see everybody in, and the train, the other half would leave the tunnel. If you've been on Eurostar, you might wonder why always the train manager not now, of course, but on these Eurostars, walks through the train just before the Channel Tunnel to the rear of the train. And that should this actually event come about, and he would then be responsible for driving the train out of the tunnel should it be the rear portion. The fire regulations have been eased for the Velaros, and no such condition now applies. These are the of the more modern TGVs are one of the least, well, in fact, they are actually the least powerful in horsepower per ton, because, of course, they have 18 coaches, and the power at the time couldn't be increased above those 1 kilowatt motors. So you've got 21.74 horsepower per ton for the so-called Transmanche units, and the north of London sets, which barely ever went north of London, of course, are nearly 25 horsepower per ton. Channel Tunnel was opened in 1994 by President Mitterrand and the Queen, and you've been in Eurostar, I'm sure many of you, you come through the tunnel and you then burst out onto the French high-speed line here at Calais, just outside of Calais-Fréthun. The Eurotunnel yard was built at the same time. Obviously, the Channel Tunnel opened a year before the tunnel. The Channel Tunnel opened a year after the high-speed line. And this is the scene here during construction of the Fréthun yard. And of course, the same scene pretty much just a little further back with a TGV coming here off the high-speed line, and it's heading in towards Calais Ville station. If you look sort of top right, you can just see some trees on the top there. Well, that's roughly where the Channel Tunnel goes, the portal is for the crossing of the English Channel. And this is the infamous Fréthun yard, where migrants would cut through the wire. I mean, very often there wasn't any wire to cut through, get onto trains, and much to discuss, they sometimes found themselves in Milan or Barcelona because, of course, hardly any freight goes through the Channel Tunnel, and these trains were actually had come from Great Britain and were going elsewhere. So this is no longer the case. You don't get any migrants trying to cross by rail anymore. On that high-speed line, there were 3 out-of-town stations: top centre at Calais-Fréthun, the busiest TGV station outside of Paris, bottom left at Lille-Europe, and a nonsense station out in the middle of Picardy it's actually named TGV Haute Picardy. Very little in the way of engineering here. This is the TGV, domestic TGV, coming from Calais to Paris, crossing the Canal de Beaubourg, about 30 miles from Calais. And the line opening in 1993 meant that with more modern generation trains coming on stream, some of the earlier TGVs from the Sud-Est line could be cascaded to the north, and for their domestic services, many of these, this is Dunkirk, were operating. And they also had a new train called the TGV Réseau network, that means, which could operate with more powerful power cars and more seating, more space for the long distance travelers on regional trains, for example, from Lille to Bordeaux or Lille to Nice, where you needed the extra power for the more demanding routes and more luggage space for the passengers. The high-speed line of the north is shared by 3 railway companies, by SNCF, the national operator of France, by the Thalys company, which is a conglomerate of 4 European countries, France, Belgium, Holland, and Germany, and of course by Eurostar. These are all at the same location, quite near to the town of Arras. The line heads south from Lille, past the old mining area of Lens and Béthune. And you may know, of course, that there were a couple of incidents in the early days of subsidence. Back in 2000, a Eurostar was derailed because the track had subsided most of that is now, well, I've not heard of a case of this recently. They've obviously checked all the alignments and everything, but this is that sort of area in that former coal mining zone. For most of the route, it's pretty uninspiring, flat landscape of Picardy, but there is the one sort of major engineering work is the viaduct of La Verberie, which is just over a mile long. And this, you can just see the train in the center there, if you look very carefully. This actually crosses the River Oise about 40 miles north of Paris. Then the trains enter Paris by coming off the high-speed line at the Weimar Triangle, and they head in through the grim suburbs of northern Paris. This is Gare Sarcelles, and you can see here a Thalys train which is leaving Paris on these dedicated 100-mile-an-hour tracks which come from the Gare du Nord. I haven't got time to talk about Thalys really, but well, until the pandemic, it was a very successful TGV service. And they have two generations of trains really, one with triple voltage, the Paris, Brussels, Amsterdam units, and below the Paris, Brussels, Cologne, Amsterdam, which has the additional voltage capacity for operating in Germany. And the route map there may have changed a little. It may be a little bit more extensive than that now, but that is the basic principle of the Thalys system. So these are the tracks that they share. You can see here that Saint-Denis, the sort of Brixton of Paris. This is a push-pull service heading away, double-deck push-pull service, heading out of Paris for Amiens. And just a few minutes later, you'll see a Eurostar on the same track. This goes for about another 5 miles. Then the high-speed line starts and the conventional trains head off to Amiens. Here in the Gare du Nord, when the TGV first came out, it was a rarity. Today, you'll probably see in the main train hall probably more TGVs and Eurostars than you will of conventional trains. There's still some local haulage in the Gare du Nord, but not much. This is one of those early TGVs, and one of the TGVs north of London sets on the left here, which 6 of which were transferred to SNCF for domestic service. And this is, of course, the terminal of Eurostar at the Gare du Nord. In 2016, of course, there was an event on one of the Thalys trains where a couple of American servicemen heard someone loading a machine gun in the toilets on a Thalys train. They apprehended and overpowered the chap before he could do anything. But since then, there's actually been a scanning and baggage check system on Thalys services into Belgium. And this here, you can see the Contrôle de Sûreté, which of course now delays the departures makes the departures take much longer. And of course, the wonderful Gare du Nord, a temple of railway architecture built in 1867, which of course is the terminus of Eurostar. The next part of the TGV network and heading towards the south of France here would be the Lyon bypass, if you like, the Rhône-Alpes line, which would head out to the little red section here opening in 1992, and then the blue section down to Valence 2 years later. This also included the first real major engineering works that the LGVs or the Ligne à grande vitesse the engineers would be faced with. At Saint-Quentin-Fallavier, you've actually got the first spaghetti junction of high-speed lines where 2 lines intersect and join. The top right or top half right, if you like, to Paris, bottom left to Marseille, to the right Grenoble, and to the left Lyon. This is a view taken over the rooftops of Lyon from the Fourvière Cathedral, and you can see in the background the viaduct of La Coterie, where the viaduct just streaks across the landscape there. You can see the foothills of the Alps in the background, and that is about 1.25 miles long, and it goes downhill at 1 in 28. An out-of-town station, which an absolute nonsense, was here at Lyon-Satelard. This was to serve the airport of Lyon, And as someone said, you know, not too long after it was opened, who is actually going to travel from Paris or Marseille to the airport here at Lyon? They both have international airports at Charles de Gaulle and at Marseille. And it was just an absolute nonsense. It cost £100 million back in 1994. It's since had a tram connection to the centre of Paris. And as we'll see right at the end of the presentation, a cheap ticket version of TGV has been introduced. And that now brings quite a lot of business to the station. Inside, it's just an absolutely amazing bit of architecture. Whether you love it or hate it, it's amazingly detailed. But you can see here, there's not too many trains stopping at this station, with a 1.5 hour gap there between two trains. Seen from above, it's actually bigger than the actual station, the airport terminal of Lyon-Satelard. The airport and the station were renamed Lyon Saint-Exupéry after the famous aviator. Now, to go up to the interval, and we'll just have a 5-minute interval if that's okay, gentlemen. One of the issues has been to link up the various high-speed lines. In 1993, we had a line coming into the Gare du Nord, one into Montparnasse and one into the Gare de Lyon. But if you wanted to travel further south, you had to take the tube or the RER and trundle your baggage with you. So the Interconnexion line was built, although right out to the east of Paris here and considerably greater distance. This would link up the various high-speed lines, and they would all be brought together here in the bottom right by the Coubert Triangle. The connections would also be made for the future Est line, the line out to east to Strasbourg, and you can see the various dimensions here. It also meant that at the Coubert Triangle, TGVs coming up from Lyon and Marseille could join the classic line into the Gare de Lyon much nearer to Paris. So the Coubert Triangle involved a new construction of the triangle, the new line with stations at Charles de Gaulle Airport and Marne-la-Vallée for Disneyland, and a new 20-kilometer route into Paris. So you can see here that this triangle would enable TGVs from the north to reach all of these other places. They could go to the west, they could go to Italy and Switzerland, the south of France, and out to the east to Germany and Luxembourg. So this is really the sort of absolute nerve center of the high-speed rail system. At Villefranche, the TGV is actually running over the site of a former railway line, but here it's actually been dug into a cut and cover section to avoid disturbing the local residents. It once looked like this at Villefranche, with a North British 280 on a freight here coming through the station, but as I say, today it's like that. Right, so we come across here, you can actually find yourself heading back towards Paris, but just near Villeneuve-Saint-Georges, the line ends, the high-speed line ends, and the TGVs go over the enormous marshalling yard at Villeneuve-Saint-Georges, and then for about another 3 or 4 miles, 5 miles, they share the Paris suburban network with RER Line C trains, and this can cause quite a lot of delay. You can see here that, in fact, the TGVs come off of a single track spur at Les Saules and join on to the RER Line C here through towards Massy-Palaiseau. This is a TGV coming from Bordeaux, and it's actually heading to Lyon. I'm sorry, from Nantes to Lyon, and it's actually already crossed over and running wrong line onto the single track spur. It's the absolute antithesis of high-speed rail travel. At Pont de Rungis, which is halfway along that line, it's the only passing place, and you can see here that a TGV is overtaking an RER Line C train on the other platform. I'm actually traveling on that train, and I actually just jumped off, took the picture of the TGV, and then ran back and got on the train. Oh, that I could run anywhere now, but there we are. And this meant that you could now connect all the provinces or the regions with each other, and look at the route possibilities this opens up. It also meant that the Eurostars could now travel from Waterloo down to Bourg-Saint-Maurice for that ski season. And they would come down here to Albertville. The photos I'm showing you now are from a chap called Didier Delattre, who was a Eurostar driver. I've forgotten, he told me how many times he'd been through the Channel Tunnel, but it was something like 12,000 or something like that. A Belgian-based, a French-based Eurostar driver. And here he's taking the service from Waterloo to Bourg-Saint-Maurice, and he's just nipped out to take this picture. Similarly here at Aime-la-Plaine, where the TGV drops people off, but it isn't allowed to pick them up because of the customs control. And then it comes here to Bourg-Saint-Maurice, which is in, of course, the Southern Alps. This lovely picture here, taken on a sunny day, overlooking the station at Bourg-Saint-Maurice. So obviously people then head off to here to the Alps, and they're going for a nice cup of tea. Well, I'm not sure if you've got time to make a cup of tea in 5 minutes, but if that's okay, I'll rejoin you in about 5 minutes or so.
Michael, do you mind? That's it. Lovely. Thank you.
Right, well, I hope you can still hear me okay. The second half then, we're going to look at the subjects in front of you there, the further lines, safety aspect of the TGV and its future. Well, the whole project of high-speed travel and the TGV came about because of capacity and line speed issues. And by 1996, it had become a victim of its own success. And there was a further need for more capacity still. So the SNCF and Alstom engineers came up with what I consider to be one of the greatest railway developments in my lifetime, which is the double-deck TGV. This is an amazing bit of kit. It is, of course, now the standard for TGV in France. There would be no further single-deckers built. And this first was introduced in 1996. It had to conform to the existing specification of TGVs in as much that it was going to be restricted in weight, and it would follow the same articulated process of the carriage sets being an eight car articulation with 2 power cars at each end. There would be a buffet car in the center. And I should say that the 2 decks are accessible, obviously, from each coach to the lower deck from the entrance door, but there is a continuous circulation through the top floor. You can pass from the top floor, coach 1 to coach 8, but the lower decks are individually accessible by that coach door. The buffet coach in the middle of the unit is just on the top deck, and the lower deck is used for technical equipment and for stores. Now, obviously, a double-deck train is going to cause problems for weight. It would have to conform within the 17-ton axle loading. So the engineers set about and came up with a solution of having an aluminium extruded monocoque shell body. This considerably reduced the weight from the previous stainless steel body, painted stainless steel body of the single deckers. It would have 200 kilos less in the way of technical equipment in weight, and each seat would be reduced in weight by 20 kilos. So this saving in weight meant that the mass of the actual net mass weight of the TGV duplex was 5 tons less than the single decker. Fully loaded, it was slightly more, but it would, with the more powerful motors and even with the double deck configuration, would actually offer the same performance, but with a power to weight ratio of 31.04 horsepower per ton. Its capacity was increased by 40%, and the actual cost of the units is 25% more. As you can see here, the units are accessible by the throughway here, in the top sort of corridor connection, and a sort of fairly gentle inclined staircase up from the entrance door below. They haven't compromised on the seating arrangement. They have the same as with all the other TGVs. The seats are lined up with the windows, and should the TGV turn upside down, then they've even got carpet on the ceiling so that you can be comfortable when you're walking out. This is a TGV duplex. The actual style and shape of them hasn't changed since 1996, but of course they're now equipped with even more powerful electric motors. The project of the double-deckers was underway, but in 1997 they also looked at an experiment of creating a tilting train, a TGV pendulaire, which could actually be used on some of the routes which weren't destined to become high-speed lines. The classic line from Paris, Orléans, Limoges and Toulouse was a prime example. At the moment, or even, sorry, at the time and at the moment, trains reach Toulouse by high speed by coming down to Bordeaux and then across the, through the Garonne Valley to Toulouse. But if they could come direct down this line at an increased speed, that would obviously be very advantageous. So they built the TGV pendulaire, and it was very successful indeed. It operated with the, well, the specially adapted articulated bogie, and it was immensely successful. But the SNCF decided not to proceed with the project, and the technology was just put on hold. It is unlikely that they will come out with another tilting TGV. Now, the line to the south coast was where it all started, the line from Paris to Marseille, and that opened in July 2001. It's a spectacular piece of engineering, and at that time, it broke all the sort of all the norms of engineering challenge. I mean, the Chinese, of course, have way surpassed this now, having probably learned a lot from the engineers of these lines. But the Mediterranean was going to be reached in 3 hours from Paris from July 2001. And this came about by the last part of this network being built down from Valence, down to the outskirts of Avignon, where the junction of Les Angles would split the lines, one going off to Nîmes and the other down to Marseille. Of course, there were protests about this because this was now coming through the sort of the classic Rhone Valley. It was going past vineyards and things, and all the protests here. This is in Avignon Station. It's obviously just before lunchtime because they'll all disappear for their lunch in a moment, and that will be the last you'd hear of it. But what they were worried about was these new generation TGVs, which they assumed, being double-deckers, would be heavier, would actually, the vibration would cause their houses to crack. And anyone who's ever had any illusion of buying a house in France or has got a house in France will know that a crack actually enhances the value of your property and not taking away from it. Of course, their fears were assuaged and the TGV line went ahead. But as I just mentioned, the engineers were faced with building this line to avoid some really sacred turf, the Rhone Valley and all its historic towns. I mean, some of these have been here, these towns here, for almost a couple of thousand years. And most importantly, of course, they'd have to avoid vineyards. This is one of the great wine growing areas of France. And you can see from this map here, the sort of the famous names of Ventoux, Luberon, Châteauneuf-du-Pape, Crozes-Hermitage, Côte de Rhône. So this was going to be a project where the line would have to duck and dive and avoid this hallowed territory. It came about with the stars all represent a major engineering work, and of course this meant that the line was going to have to cross the River Rhône 3 or 4 times, the Canal de Danzère a couple of times, the River Durance, and then have 17 kilometers of actual viaducts and 13 kilometers of tunnels. So this was a major undertaking, bearing in mind this was the late 90s. Some of the major engineering projects are shown here, but I think the one that has always fascinated me the most is the bridge over the Canal de Donzère at La Garde. Here, it's a triple bowstring arch bridge, and the bridge was fabricated by the Eiffel company at Lauterbourg in Alsace, 650 kilometers from the actual site. Well, this was designed and built in 39 giant sections, and quite clearly they couldn't take these by road. So the actual route to the site was by barge down the River Rhone through, the River Rhine, through all of the, I think it's 20 odd locks to Rotterdam, where it was loaded onto a sea freighter. It passed all the way around the Bay of Biscay and Portugal, through the Straits of Gibraltar to Fos-sur-Mer, and then was stuck on a barge for the last 180 kilometers or whatever it is up the River Rhone to the site. Once there, this is the site with a little bit of help from Photoshop. It was assembled like a sort of giant Meccano kit. Various sections were put together at this triple arch bridge, and of course the TGV just streaks across it in a number of seconds, and you wouldn't know it was there. Whilst on some of the other lines, they'd had a high-speed record attempt on to launch the TGV, if you like, on those routes. Here on the Mediterranean route, they decided they would have Operation Sardine, which was going to be at the time the longest high-speed non-stop run in the world from Calais to Marseille in 3 hours, and well, it was in 3 hours, 29 minutes and 50 seconds, 640 miles at an average of 325 kilometers an hour. So it was at an average of something like 212 miles an hour, 325 kilometers, 212 miles. Sorry, I've lost control of my mouse here. Just go back a bit. Right. So that was given great fanfare and coverage in the press, and that preceded the opening of the line. The trains would obviously be departing from here in the Gare de Lyon, and to launch the service, they put some potted palm trees at a cost of 10,000 euros each into the Gare de Lyon to give you that Mediterranean feel. And some extra TGVs were ordered from Alstom to supplement the existing fleet, and away they went. The first line, which I showed you at the beginning of the part one, was signaled at the slower speed of 155 miles an hour. Well, that was going to be upgraded to 200 miles an hour with the new TVM 430 signaling system. And that would mean that the whole line was fully integrated, and that the Marseille could be reached in 3 hours and 3 minutes non-stop from Paris. 3 out-of-town stations were built on this line at Valence, at Avignon, and bottom at Aix-en-Provence. Aix-en-Provence, it is out of town, it's about 14 miles from the centre, but unlike the other out-of-town stations, these would be immensely popular, particularly with skiers for top and bottom in winter, and for holidaymakers during the summer season. One of the other major engineering works is the twin bridges of the Les Angles crossing of the River Rhone. Here you can see that the train on the left is coming from is going towards Nîmes. The line on the left goes, no, I've got this wrong way around, I beg your pardon. The train is coming from Avignon back towards Paris, and the viaducts on the right, they're separate viaducts. They're inclined with a camber to keep the speed limits going. On the right leads from Avignon down towards Nîmes and Perpignan. there were a lot of classic there were a lot of classic buildings and historic sites on the way. The aqueduct of Roquefort, although only dating from the 19th century, was fairly close to the new line, and so they built the viaduct here, the Viaduc des Arcs, of arcs, that is, and they used a supporting bowstring underneath to reflect the image of the Roquefort viaduct. And this is, to say, just near to Aix-en-Provence. The viaduct here, which just for the moment I've forgotten the name of, is actually Vantabren. Viaduct of Vantabren is also in the heart of Provence here. And when you see it from the rooftops of a Provençal village, you can see that it's about 1.5 miles long, and it's curved in plan and at a camber as well. So it's an amazing bit of concrete engineering. And then the tunnel approach into Marseille comes under the northwest suburbs and into Marseille Saint-Charles station. Even in something like February or March, you can leave Paris with a temperature perhaps of something like 8 or 9 degrees centigrade, and it will be 20 here in Marseille. So you certainly notice it stepping out here at Marseille Saint-Charles station. Just before Marseille, there's a junction off to the left in direction of travel, and this heads round here past the red rocks of Provence and onto to Cannes and Nice, and occasionally up to the Italian border at Menton. The line we just looked at obviously went into Marseille. The line in blue here is the other branch which heads into Nîmes and Montpellier. Montpellier, of course, a very important and very nice city on the Mediterranean. The train runs around the Golfe de Lion here. This is a picture taken by Jacques Catorze, who's quite a well-known and celebrated French railway photographer. And this is the route map here. You can see the branches dotted would be on classic lines. So there's a fair chunk of high speed here coming down from Paris all the way to Marseille, and then you can continue your journey on classic lines. So that opened in 2001, and the next to open was in 2007, the line out to the east, the TGV Est. This, as we'll see in a minute, all of the lines after the Atlantique were built to different financial, sorry, I beg your pardon, all the lines after the Mediterranean were built to different financial models. And this was going to be a different now. Well, we'll look at that towards the end. It would also have a new generation of train. To give you a time scale, impression of the time scale, the feasibility study started 22 years before the line was completed. And of course, you have to have your Déclaration of Utilité Publique, or the sort of green light for financing, and then the civil engineering works commence. The construction work on site usually takes about the same time as the commissioning and testing. So that's not the element which takes the time. This would also be the first line to be engineered for a higher speed of actual 200 miles per hour, as opposed to the 186 we'd had on the previous lines. Extra lines were electrified here. The line to Epinal and to Saint-Dié were electrified, and the services would come down the core there all the way. This would be built in 2 stages, the first stage opening in 2007 and the second in 2016, and Strasbourg was the main objective. To launch this, they did decide to have a world speed record attempt, and the previous records are shown here. You can see that it had gone up incrementally in the first 20 years from 237 miles an hour to 322. But they were going to try on this to create a record of 150 meters per second. And this would be achieved by building a very special train, by engineering adjustments to the track, and a budget of a mere 20 million euros to create it. And the train would start these tests and a record attempt 3 months before the line opened. Now, the one thing, if you have a train going particularly fast, is that when it hits the track, it throws the ballast out. Ballast is projected sideways. So they not only had to reballast parts of quite a bit of the test section, but they had to put up wire fences to stop people being decapitated by flying ballast. British locos, of course, you recognise here, Class 56 and Class 58, have been present for nearly all of the construction of the high-speed lines. This is a picture by Brian Stevenson, who I'm sure many of you will know his photos or know him. This is out on the East Line prior to its opening. Special ballasting and requires special tamping and a track assessment, and this was all done multiple times before the high-speed line was run. And they created this monster of a train which would actually have 25,000 horsepower output. To get the maximum power out of it, they motorized obviously the two motor cars, and they also put in powered bogies on a couple of the trailers. This meant that it needed, for the attempted record, a power supply of 31,000 volts at 800 amps. So with the goodwill of the locals of Lorraine, where this was tested, they didn't use their kettles or toasters for a few hours so that the trains could run at maximum power. They also equipped the power cars with much bigger wheels, 7-inch greater diameter wheels to gain that extra bit of distance covered on each revolution. And the train was ready to go. It was painted up with this sort of Darth Vader livery, and a special section of track had been chosen, like the Mallard, a little bit of downhill involved in it, and the train was ready. It did 3,200 kilometers of trials over 450 kilometers an hour before the actual record attempt was made. And when it did, they say that the catenary was incandescent. They weren't worried at all about the train coming off the track. No worry about that at all. What they were worried about was that the catenary would be brought down, but that didn't happen. And during the actual test runs, they allowed the public to stand on the overbridges and film it. I mean, can you imagine that in this country, of actually being allowed to stand over the top of a train doing 357 miles an hour? Oh, there you are. I'd forgotten I got a picture in. I've filched this picture from somewhere, but these are members of the French Gravesend and Lutterworth clubs here out taking pictures of this train hurtling past. There were even a pair of 2 sets of points, including a facing set of points on the actual high-speed route. And so it achieved the world speed record of 359, actually, rather than what I said, miles an hour. And that was only about 3 miles an hour slower than the maglev system out in Japan. These are the various records achieved, and you can see there that 359.4 miles an hour will probably stay unchallenged as a world speed record for metal wheel or metal rail. Mon Dieu, so fast it was terrifying, says the guy in the Times. And for once, a newspaper actually got their railway facts right with the various speed records here declared. You can see there that the Japanese maglev was just under 4 miles an hour faster than the TGV. They did some publicity stunts with it, and you've got here the 1852 Greyhound locomotive, Thomas Crampton, positioned here for the press next to the high-speed train. And they even paraded it on the River Seine in Paris. The French are just so good at tourism and publicity. I mean, everybody in this country moved trains or something, but here they were proud of it and they displayed it to all and sundry in Paris. After the test, it was returned to the La Vie Quotidienne, the everyday life, and initially it came back in the SNCF livery, and there below it's in the Lyria livery of the services which run out to Switzerland, and that's its current state. Now the TGV Est service, or the line, the LGV Est, the Ligne Grande Vitesse Est, was going to be shared by two railway companies. Deutsche Bahn had already been operating into the Gare de l'Est with their ICE units, and they would be joined by the TGV SNCF services. It's interesting that reports of reliability have shown that over the period of this line being open, the majority of failures and breakdowns have been with the ICE trains and not with the TGVs. The service would operate, you can see here, if you wanted to travel in style, you could come to the Gare de l'Est in this Trabi, the Ultramant car there, would operate from the Gare de l'Est. The station opened in 1859, and this station would receive a bit of an upgrade. That absolutely essential railway ingredient was introduced to the Gare de l'Est. Sock shop and Ties R Us and all those other shops were introduced, new display screens, and the parcels hall was renovated from its state of abandon into a shopping centre. So all the ingredients you need for high-speed travel. And the trains would be a hybrid train. They would be powered with a new generation of duplex power car, but they would be fitted they would be supplied with single-deck coaches. The train at the top is one of the conventional TGVs, what is known as the Rezo set, which I mentioned for cross-country regional travel. That's 33 units of those operate the domestic services from Paris to the other French cities, and the international services into Germany, Luxembourg, and Switzerland were operated by these so-called POS sets, Paris Ost. I always get tongue-tied with this, but it's east of France, Ostfrankreich, Süddeutschland, southern Germany, which would have single-deck trailers and high-powered cars for that motor cars, and there were 18 of these sets. They had a girls' frock designer to do the interiors, Lacroix, and he came out with these rather insipid-looking colours here. The top one second class and the bottom first. The trains would be serviced here at Urk, and as we'll see in a moment, all of the TGV lines have their own maintenance depots for the track and servicing and maintenance centres, which they call techni-centres, for the actual stock. This bunch of motley-looking individuals was the French Railway Society. I'm holding the sign there saying SNCF Society. Of course, we're now the French Railway Society. And this was our visit to the depot here at Urk, just after the line had opened. We weren't allowed to take any photos because the unions were going on strike the next day, and they didn't want anyone to be photographed doing nothing the day before. The TGVs come in and out of the Gare de l'Est, as they do on the other lines, on classic routes and shared with suburban trains. And this is the eastern suburb of Bondy, where a TGV from Strasbourg is heading in towards Paris. We're doing about 80 miles an hour past here. It's about 5 miles already off the high-speed line. 3 out-of-town stations. The Champagne-Ardenne serves the town of Reims, Reims. Lorraine serves the town of Nancy. And the one at the bottom, Meurs, well, it sort of serves the local cows, really, because it's the least used TGV station in the whole of France. And in its first year, only 50,000 people actually use the station. This is the main centre of attraction, which is Strasbourg, and one of those POS sets here is getting ready to head back to Paris. The station, of course, was built by or rebuilt by the Prussians in 1871 after the Franco-Prussian War. And this magnificent Italian Renaissance building was opened in 1876, complete with the Kaiser's own dining rooms and suites. But this was no good for the TGV. They needed something that with much more capacity. And so they did the almost unthinkable by building this enormous greenhouse over the front of the station. It's known as La Limace, which means the slug in English. And this actually has created an enormous amount of extra space by providing more circulation areas, access to car parks and the tramway system, new waiting areas. And at night, of course, it looks fantastic when it's all lit up inside, so you can see the old building shining through the old. The route map here, all the lines heading off the main trunk route, and you can see that it has connections. You can now go to Lille and travel to Strasbourg by TGV, similarly to Brest and Quimper and down to Bordeaux in the west. A TGV line, which is not a TGV line, it was the La Ligne de Haute Bougie, which in effect was a shortcut to reduce the time from Paris to Geneva by 20 minutes. What they did was to, hitherto, was to travel down to Ambérieu, Culoz, and back up to Bellegarde around the Jura Mountains. But by building a line straight across, using in part, in the major part, either existing or abandoned routes. And the section just to the where the line goes through Bellegarde was an abandoned route, and so this was all re-engineered, a single track, and the old tunnels were rehabilitated. The bridges were resurfaced and waterproofed, and the amazing viaduct of Le Cise-Bollazon, to the bottom right here, was brought into use for the TGV. It's a spectacular construction. The road is obviously down below there, and for the whole of this route, the TGVs go through at a speed of not greater than 60 or 70 miles an hour, but the 20-minute savings have obviously improved the journey time. There's one new station opened up at Murieux, and actually I went there to take a picture. I'm not showing the actual picture tonight of TGVs passing here, but there was nobody on the station at all. The station only opens up for 3 trains a day, and this is actually this area of the Silicon Valley of Eastern France, and the trains primarily pick up passengers in the morning, 2 trains in the morning, to go to Paris, and 2 trains stop at night time. There's one other during the day. Another project is to link up the existing high-speed line from Nîmes right down to the Spanish border. A section was opened in 2010, and another section between Nîmes and Montpellier a couple of years ago, with a station, out-of-town station at Montpellier. But the bit in between, nobody really knows about that. Here on the Spanish border, you can see a saut de mouton, a flyover, where the track in the foreground is actually the track to Paris, and you can see it's crossed over in the distance there from the line going from Paris to Barcelona, because obviously they have right-hand running in Spain. Now, the service that I mentioned going out on the east there to Switzerland, that only had in terms of going to Switzerland, only had a fairly short life, because another line was going to open up here. The Rhine-Rhone line opened in 2011, and all of those services which had gone via Strasbourg and down the Rhine Valley were diverted onto the high-speed line down from Paris. The first line opened, and then across country here to Mulhouse and through to Basel and on to Zurich. The problem for this line has been that this has been built in isolation of a project meant to link Strasbourg with Lyon, and it is very, very debatable whether the other sections will ever be built. It's now used by all of the Swiss services. They go this way, and you can see that this has a separate branding. This is possibly a prelude to privatization. But the Swiss government have a stake in this, and they actually own some of the TGVs that operate over the line. Up until the creation of Lyria, they had used those 10 tri-voltage TGVs, which I mentioned at the beginning, but they were now getting past their sell-by date, and were going to be replaced by the new generation POS units, which I showed you earlier. And I think, I'm not sure, no, half of the fleet of the TGV Lyrias are the form of POS fleet, and the other half are now operating, rather than at 320 kilometers an hour to Germany, are now operating from Paris to Calais and Dunkirk. You can see here a very nice sort of imitation of the double-deck train here, with one cow standing on the back of another, watching the train on its way through from Switzerland to France. Well, the TGV celebrated 30 years in 2011, 30 years of service, and this was marked with special events. A train, unit number 65, was created as an exhibition train. This toured 20 major cities in France. People were invited, and you could just see how many people have turned up to see this. You don't get sneered at in France if you're a railway enthusiast. People appreciate your interest, and the French are very interested in the TGV. It's listed as one of the top 10 most French things in the minds of French people. They celebrated at the Gare de Lyon on the 27th of September 2011, those 30 years. They floodlit the Gare de Lyon in the colours of the TGV, and they assembled in the main hall one of each type of TGV built. Can you imagine Euston or Paddington being handed over to a celebration like this for a night of every type of TGV? And of course, they had the mock cake and the glamorous actress there to be present with Guillaume Pepi, who at the time was head of SNCF. Now, in 2013, the Ouigo service, a bit of a play on words here, but the service from out of Paris down to Marseille and Montpellier was introduced. The French call this Ryanair on rails because it's a cheap and nasty service with no allowance for baggage unless you pay for it, no refreshments. Everything is done cheap and nastily except the trains, because the trains are conventional TGVs. They have more seats in them than the others, but it's only because they've downgraded first class and removed the buffet car that they've increased the capacity to 634 seats. It's a very attractive livery. So they've gained nearly 100 extra seats by doing this. And now, as you can see here, this is the Gare de Lyon. They now operate from within the heart of the major cities, not on the outskirts. It is very much like the Ryanair principle, where they would dump you off at somewhere miles from where you wanted to go. But now SNCF sees that within the next 10 years, 35 to 40% of TGVs will be low cost. And here we are just on the outskirts of Lille. This is a massive capacity train. I mean, this is a train carrying 1,300 passengers, and it's a very popular. If you buy in advance, you can buy a ticket for 10 or 15 euros for a journey of 500 miles. Well, after that positive development, let's have a look at a negative one. The Velaro units came in. I have yet to meet anyone who likes them. I know a few Eurostar drivers, they hate them. I've been on them. They're terrible for people like me with big feet and long legs. They rock about, absolutely useless. But of course, they handle more people with fewer coaches. So that's what it's all about. You know, it's only a journey of 2 hours from Ebbsfleet or less than that. So you just have to put up with it. The last postal units ended in 2015, and this was a great idea. This idea of palletized parcel traffic from Paris to Ripple Lane would have been a great idea, but nobody's going to fork out the cost of building new units for it. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Now, the safety aspect of the TGV has always been something they've been very, very proud of. I'm sorry, that is a rogue slide there. I'm awfully sorry. I'll be coming to that again in a moment. Another cheap TGV initiative was this so-called IZI, which meant that you could buy budget tickets from Paris to Paris to Brussels. But the condition was that you were made to suffer by having to travel over the conventional route for the first 150 miles and then take up the high-speed line from there. The idea being that it would not be seen to be a direct competitor with the TGV. They painted up a couple of TGVs and one of the Eurostar North London sets to operate the service. There it is there. in 2017, the unthinkable came about, and they rebranded the TGV service Inouï. And I forgot what this stands for in French, but it does mean something. But there was absolute outrage on social media. People were posting, this is the end of the world as I know it. The TGV is being rebranded as Inouï, but somebody thought it was a good idea at the time and they've stuck with it. Now, extensions to the existing network came about in 2017, and the line out to Brittany was extended from Le Mans to Rennes, and the line from Tours all the way down to Bordeaux. This made dramatic savings in the journey time. I mean, Bordeaux at only 2 hours, 5 minutes from Paris means it would be impossible to fly in the same time by the time you got from Paris out to the airport. But no out of town stations, and you can see that instead of those, they've actually got spurs linking the high-speed line in with the towns that are served. The new line, this is the Atlantique southern section. You can just see in the background there an overbridge. That's the A10 motorway, and it follows that for a fair amount of time and then all the way up to Tours. In 2019, they commemorated virtually the end of the TGV first generation units by creating a special train with 2 power cars in the original livery and the trailers in the subsequent liveries that they had worn. And they numbered this, it was power car number 01, and they actually toured this train around France in form of an exhibition as a sort of farewell tour for those first generation trains. And here's a picture taken, what would it be, 40 years apart, with the initial TGVs at Villeneuve-Saint-Georges, and they tried to recreate here with the celebratory train here in the background. With these TGVs being withdrawn from service, somebody suggested, and to my mind, a very good idea, why not use them on classic lines? Because passengers like the TGV, they're quite comfortable, they have amazing capacity. And for a while earlier this year, they actually used a couple of these sets from Paris Saint-Lazare out to Cherbourg and Le Havre on the line out through Normandy. Despite the chimneys in the background, this is quite near to Monet's Giverny Garden. And here you can see a train heading towards Paris Saint-Lazare. Also, during the COVID crisis, they used a couple of TGV duplex sets to transport people suffering with COVID from badly affected areas out to hospitals that were better able to cope with them. And they actually carried a number of patients in each coach, which was specially fitted out for the purpose. Here, you can see here that these are some press shots of one of the ambulance trains. Right, so we'll now look at these sort of subsidiary subjects, if you like, rather than the actual sort of running of the TGV. One of the things that the French have benefited from is the incredible continuity program of building these lines. Very often the site supervisors, engineers and designers have transferred from one project to another. And you can see here that how the projects have sort of literally like a sort of baton, it's been passed from one to another. I don't have the full costs for all of the lines, but these are just tiny amounts compared with the relative vast sums that we will be paying out for HS2. The TGV lines, of course, have meant a dramatic change to the landscape. This is exactly the same position with Street View. If you've got the time and you can go back, you can find this is the line out towards in Brittany here. So they do create an amount of disruption and of course to the landscape, and of course you're going to benefit from this up in the Midlands, I'm sure. But the project has been an ongoing one, and in the main, the engineering trains have been provided by either old older SNCF locos or hired in locos. Unlike here in this country, we use state-of-the-art locos for infrastructure works. Out there, they tend to use hand-me-downs, and you can see here class 58s on the line out towards the east. The system of laying the lines has been changed as well. Initially, they would come as prefabricated panels with the rails already attached to the sleepers, but now they actually place the sleepers and lay down the 200-meter lengths of rail and attach them that way. Another thing that one has to bear in mind with high-speed lines is that you move and divert roads and rivers as much as you do railway lines. And this is an example here where this road would actually ran right through the middle of this formation, but it has been diverted to an overbridge further south. More bridges, of course, for footacts, for pedestrians, and for access to farms and all that sort of thing. Now, will there be future lines? Yes, there will be. And Macron only announced about 6 weeks ago that 2 or 3 of the projected lines are going to be dusted down. We're not quite sure quite when they were going to be brought about, but in the main, most of the TGV lines will stay as they are, and existing lines will be upgraded to 225 km/h running, main lines, of course. Now, financing. Initially, the first 4 lines were built on the most appreciated form of financing that any railway engineer would like. He's given a blank check by the government and asked, please fill in the amount you want and we'll pay it. And as I'm going to show you in a moment, that's the way you get the cheapest railway of all. And that was the French government's funding of those first lines, and SNCF and their contractors were able to build at a fraction of the cost of the present lines. The first line of all was built at a cost of 2017, updated to 2017, of £7.47 million a mile. 7.47 million pounds a mile. I think the figure quoted for HS2 is something like 260 million pounds a mile, I think, or something like that. So that's the difference. For the line out to the east, rather than state giving the money directly, the money was paid by all the various departments and towns and areas, regions, affected by it. As a result, the Est line had 53 financial contributors. My only view of this, of course, is that knowing France as I do, this would have meant at least a couple of lunches every week for about 5 years while they discuss all this and have all their various planning meetings. And the French do like their lunch. For the latest lines, you've actually come to a much more expensive system whereby a private public funding arrangement is whereby the state and the EU cough up about half of the money, and the installation contractor or the main contractor becomes an operating contractor whereby he puts up the other half of the money and has a franchise for 50 years to run the line. 50 years when he builds it in the first place, he then maintains it and then operates it in terms of actual infrastructure management. And for that, he receives the péage, which is the track access charge. SNCF wanted to pay the operators of this line for 38 trains a day, and Lisea, who are the contractors or the franchisees, wanted 48. As a result, SNCF now anticipates to lose 100 million euros a year just to meet these costs. So all of this costing, once you get away from direct funding, it becomes more and more expensive. So here's an analysis here. Your collective funding TGV, which are the Est, is £24 million per mile. Private public 30 million. 80 million for HS1, and I think my figure for HS2 is before they actually woke up and stopped dreaming. I think it's now more than 121 million pounds per mile. I believe it is closer to 200 million pounds per mile. So quite a lot of difference from that initial 7.7. Okay, the French don't have perhaps such a densely populated country and so many objections to face and tunneling and all that sort of thing. But nevertheless, I would only have thought that that would account for double or treble the cost. So the TGV fleet, the original ones have been in a process of withdrawal from 2012 to 2021. Some of them have done 12 million kilometers. That's nearly 8 million miles in service. The sad sight of these units being towed away to be broken up, and in fact, these trains, of course, are quite long, so they've had to create special dumps for them. This is a former military. This is either a former or an actual military base out in the east of France, and you can see all the TGVs lined up there. And it's very sad to see these giants here just languishing on temporary track, even on timber sleepered track here, awaiting their fate. They've preserved a couple of the units, and they've got one here going into the French National Railway Museum. Similarly, the Eurostar North of London sets were withdrawn, and the start of the standard Transmanche Eurostars started to be withdrawn from 2014. And again, here you've got a temporary dump here for Eurostars and TGVs out near the Swiss border. The TGV Atlantiques, there's still 28 of those in service, but they have been gradually being withdrawn. They may last in service for another 2, possibly 3 years, but everything is being replaced by new generation double-deckers. And as for the one of the reasons, of course, for single deck withdrawal is that the péage or access charge is the same because it's the same track wear from double deck or single deck. So that's one of the reasons for all double deck in future. Now you have duplex or double deck trains on all the lines. So just going clockwise, the Gare de l'Est top left, the Gare du Nord with line 2 of the metro there, top right, Montparnasse bottom left, and the lines out from the Gare de Lyon in the southeast. The Ouigo trains are now appearing in the Paris termini, as I mentioned earlier. And this is the state of the current fleet, bearing in mind that in the days when all of the single deckers were in use, in those days, the fleet did once reach 510 units, but now it's 394. This might be a little bit out of date. I think a couple of new duplex trains are coming online every month. And of course, Alstom has built the lot. Liveries, well, mostly they've stuck with these basic liveries of the orange, the silver and blue, the yellow of La Poste, the maroon and grey of Thalys, and the La Croix livery down below, and of course now the white Inouï livery in the centre there. Occasionally you have special liveries, and the Thalys Unit 4343 is a celebrity, and it is the one that always bears the special liveries. And this has had all sorts of things from Disneyland, the launch of the Euro, the Tour de France cycle race, all sorts of things like that. And even one of the units was done up as a chocolate train here to promote Les Secrets du Chocolat, the secrets of chocolate. Now, TGV safety, I'm sorry you had that slide appearing earlier. I'm not quite sure how that got there, but the TGV has a very impressive safety record, apart from one example, which we'll come to in a moment. No passenger has been killed in a high-speed accident. Most of the accidents that have involved derailments or damage have been caused offline by TGVs at level crossings, a little bit of subsidence. A couple of occasions they've had fractured axles which have caused them to derail. but as I say, mainly on level crossings where motorists have ignored the signal. I'm not sorry. I've just lost my picture for the moment. I beg your pardon. Right. As I said, accidents on level crossings. This is a fully gated or barriered level crossing, but the French do have a habit of ignoring these, and they have on average about 1 or 2 level crossing accidents per month in France. Here near to Bourg-en-Bresse, unit number 46 hit a transformer lorry. The lorry was taking an enormous electrical transformer. It hit it at 70 miles an hour on this level crossing. And you can see from top right there that the train stayed upright, although completely derailed due to the articulated architecture of the set. And the power car, with the impact, the driver actually got out of the unit onto the track to phone for emergency help. That was the strength of these original TGVs. But out at Equinhem in the east of France, they were testing the signaling equipment for the cab signaling for the new line to open out to Strasbourg. And in keeping with normal procedure, they'd actually switched off the safety systems. You have to switch off the safety systems when you're fully testing this equipment. And the train approached this curve here, lieu de déraillement, obviously the place of derailing, over the canal here. And the train actually hit the curve at 55 kilometers an hour faster than it should have been. And the whole train came off and landed down below. 11 people were killed, but it was found afterwards that there were 9 people in the cab. It's suggested, allegedly, that the driver was distracted by talking to people in the cab. And of the 53 people on board, there were 6 children who obviously had been invited by parents and by who worked for the project. Amongst those killed were the head of the project, the chief engineer of Systra, the design and installation engineers. Nobody was killed in the leading power car. That somehow, I think, just stayed on the track, and all the trailers were flung off. But you can see here by the numbers, M2 means motrice. I'm sorry, it didn't actually stay on the track, but it actually landed on the bank there. R means remorque or trailer, and you can just see here how the train was scattered all over the site here. And it took some time to remove the damaged train, and they actually rather bizarrely assembled the train here on an adjacent road. Now, TGV maintenance is undertaken at these technicentres, and they have various degrees of ability at the various technicentres. Obviously, the state of the art, where the complete train can be lifted and bogies can be changed. 4 of the centres are based in the Paris area, each serving the various lines radiating from the capital. They deal with day-to-day maintenance. Should there be something requiring heavy maintenance, that goes to either LM near to Lille or to Bischheim near to Strasbourg. But if there's major problems, it goes back to the manufacturer at Alstom Belfort or at Aitre at La Rochelle. Another basic maintenance facility is here at Gérin in Lyon. Each line has its own maintenance depot for track repairs and such like. And they have all the equipment here. They have tampers and ballasters. And you can see here these really dilapidated Class 67,000 diesels. They're actually fitted with the TVM signaling equipment so that they could operate over the lines. And you can see here that there's 4 of them, and they obviously work on the jumbo jet principle, whereby if one of them fails, 3 engines will get them back, and if another one fails, 2. And ultimately, one of them must survive it to get the train back to its base. They have a test train. We have our test trains, don't we? They used to be based at Derby. I see one often here in my hometown of Tunbridge, in Tunbridge West Yard. And they are laboratory cars. They have sleeping facilities. And these do a track recording and inspection of the entire 2,600 kilometers of the French high-speed network every week with onboard staff. They've got a kitchen and bedrooms and a mess room and all that sort of thing. And I won't go into it in too much detail, but you can see here a weekly tour of duty over the 5 days covers all of the high-speed lines in both directions. But what has there been, the TGV, what price has it been delivered? Because it's a wonderful system. It hasn't cost that much compared with what we're faced with, but it has come at a price. It's come at a price of a neglect of existing and branch lines, whereby the weed-strewn tracks everywhere to be seen, mechanical signalling. It's great for us railway enthusiasts to take pictures of trains with mechanical signals, but not if you're operating a modern railway. Derailments at level crossings, you can see here bottom left, and le bustitution, the replacement of bus services. Country branch lines in France are under a massive threat, especially in the Massif Central. Well, okay, there's no high-speed lines there, but they have been deprived. But since the advent of regionalisation in 2003, this is beginning to be put right. There's less money being spent on TGV lines and more money by the regions. After all, the regions are run by politicians who want to be re-elected, so they're trying to pull their socks up and get the railway sorted out. A review in 2014 showed that only 60% of TGVs on the high-speed lines were actually on time, and 30% of them lose money set against the business case that they were meant to satisfy. Now, bear this in mind, gentlemen, HS2 has been, of course, it's very fashionable now, particularly with the present government, that they're levelling up the country and they're making everybody north of Watford into millionaires by bringing the high-speed rail from London to them so that people can go from London and do their business in the north and Scotland. This was the same principle applied to the TGV in France, and the review study found that rather than taking people to the regions, it actually helped people to get to London even quicker, and to get to Paris even quicker. And I suspect that this will be the case with HS2 as well. And you can see here that all of these major centres here benefited from the TGV with access to Paris rather than the other way around. From the business case, only one of the lines actually meets its business case of profitability, and that is the line from Paris to Lyon, the very first line to open. The other lines you can see here, I mean, for example, the lines out to the west only meet a half of their actual target amount. Success of out-of-town stations has been very poor. They were put in really at the behest of local politicians, but again, that's not going to happen anymore. In terms of journeys, well, for air, over air, compared with air, the TGV scores massively for journeys up from 1 to 2 hours. 80% of people will travel by train, 20 by air, but it's the reverse when you come to places like Nice, where you've got a 5-hour journey, only 20% of people, and they will be leisure traffic, actually travel by train to Nice. So today, the TGV network is 2,020, sorry, no, that's a year, isn't it? It's 2,651 kilometers, and all of these major cities are served by the TGV. By 2021, it is estimated that 2.25 billion passengers have used the TGV. And this is an exponential growth, bearing in mind that the first 100 million passengers took 6 years on the first line. The expansion of budget services, that's going to come about, and you're going to see, as I mentioned before, 35 to 40% of all TGV services will be with budget services. Privatization, well, the COVID crisis has put that on hold, but there is talk of Thalys and Eurostar. I think the talks have recommenced of merging, and that would take that out of the hands of SNCF and the other railway companies, almost certainly Lyria. The French railways are now subject to privatization, and it could be that some TGV lines could be privatized by 2026. So the dotted lines are TGV lines in abeyance, maybe the line from Lyon to Milan, maybe the line from Bordeaux to Toulouse, the connection down in the south from Montpellier to Perpignan, but don't expect too much more. Perhaps the line up towards Amiens it will also be built, but it's more to do with investment in existing lines. A new generation of TGV is in the process of being introduced. This used to be known as the TGV modulaire, the modular TGV. I'm not quite sure, it's got some new fancy name, but it'll look something like that. And that is the future of the TGV. So gentlemen, we have, oh, sorry, I've gone the wrong way. We have a network of 2,650 kilometers, a fleet of 400 TGVs, and that has brought us nicely to the buffer stops. Thank you very much.